Hello, sixth graders, and welcome to our renewable energy resources notes. Last week we learned about non-renewable energy, and this week we're going to talk about renewable energy sources. I'm wearing my Planet Earth shirt because renewable energy is friendlier to the environment than non-renewable. Swabat, students will be able to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of renewable energy sources. So this is exactly like non-renewable, except for now we're talking about renewable. All right, renewable energy sources are energy resources that naturally replenish or renew themselves over a short period of time. Sometimes people will say like maybe even considering like 20 years, and some of them are renewed daily. They are not depleted by use, meaning they will not run out as we're not using them up in comparison to fossil fuels. All right, the first one we're going to talk about is solar energy, which sol comes from the word sun or star. So solar is energy from the sun. You need some sort of technology to capture that energy, and they can be on buildings or they can even be on the ground. They can be in like these big fields of solar panels. All right, advantages of solar energy. Solar panels are pretty simple technology. They require very little maintenance. They're silent, basically. You don't have any noise with solar panels. And sunlight is free after you purchase the panels. We're going to find that as a theme for renewable energy, is that a lot of these resources are free once you build the technology to capture the energy. There's a ton of sunlight that reaches the earth, so there's a lot of solar energy that's available to us, and no pollution is created with this energy. Disadvantages. You can't get energy at night or when the sun's not out. So like if there are clouds or storms, that can reduce sunlight that you can capture. The panels themselves require space. Like this picture down here shows like a solar panel field, a solar energy field. So that requires some space. Panels are fairly inefficient, where they only convert about 20% of the sun's energy into electricity. So they could be better, although technology is getting better all the time. They're getting better. And the panels themselves are not cheap. So, I mean, they're not super expensive, but they are not cheap. All right, the next technology for renewable energy is wind. Wind energy is captured with wind turbines. The blades turn a generator producing electricity. So like inside these turbines, they're moving a generator, and that electricity travels down. Groups of wind turbines are called wind farms. They can be located in a lot of different places. They can be located in the mountains. They can be located near farmland. They can be located in the ocean. Another thing about wind is that people have been using wind energy for centuries. Like old-fashioned windmills or old-fashioned things that people used on farms created energy on their farms. So this technology has been kind of around for a really long time. Obviously, the newer wind turbines are more advanced than old ones, but the technology's been there for a while. All right, wind advantages. It can be very efficient energy and inexpensive in places with steady winds. So there's a lot of places like Wyoming has a lot of wind farms because there's a lot of wind that happens in the state of Wyoming. There's no pollution. The wind is free after you've purchased the turbine, so that's very similar to solar. One turbine can power about 600 homes. So one of these wind turbines can power 600 homes, which is a lot of electricity. Disadvantages. Wind can be inconsistent. You might live in a place, or there might be a city where there's not a lot of wind that could be captured for energy. So it's not a good source of energy in all locations. The moving turbines can be dangerous for birds and bats. So birds, they can hit birds and they can be killed. They can disrupt the land where they're built, especially in the ocean. So, you've got to put them in and you've got construction. They are also noisy. So in comparison to solar, solar is silent, and these wind turbines are pretty noisy. Some people complain that they are not beautiful to look at. So like if you're looking out across the prairie or across where you live and you see these wind turbines, that they're not very pretty. And the turbines themselves are expensive to build. All right, the next energy is called geothermal energy. Let's break down this word for a second. Geo means earth, thermal means heat, and basically this is energy that you're getting from underneath the crust or from like the hot mantle or a asthenosphere or something that's underneath a hot spot that's down below the earth. So if you've ever been to Yellowstone or something like that, you see all these things like boiling mud and geysers. That's all because we've got some hot spot or geothermal activity below the surface of the earth. So water is warmed by magma and pumped to the surface, and it mostly is used to create heat for buildings. Steam can also be brought to the surface and to create electricity. Iceland, which is located on a mid-ocean ridge, so there's lots of geothermal activity there. You've got to be, near a place that has this kind of activity. Iceland gets like 90% of their energy from geothermal activity, and that's because they're right on a plate boundary and they have access to geothermal heat. All right, advantages. It's clean. It doesn't release greenhouse gases. It's reliable, meaning it's not really based on weather. So it doesn't matter if the sun's out or the wind is blowing. This heat under the crust of the earth is there all the time. It's very quiet. And the heat of the earth is consistent and free. You just got to tap into it. Disadvantages. It's not available in all places, like we just talked about with Iceland. Iceland's located in a great place to access this kind of energy, but not every place is. It is expensive to build power plants. It's not very easily transported over long distances. It sometimes requires the use of water to heat. It can damage the environment where the plants are built, and sometimes minerals can escape and can be smelly. So I don't know if any of you have ever been to the hot springs in Idaho Springs. If you've ever swam there, that's basically built in an area where there is geothermal activity right below. It's heating the water, but it's also kind of smelly. It's bringing other elements out into the open, like sulfur that smells like rotten eggs or something like that. And so other minerals can escape where these things are built. All right, the next form of energy is called biomass. Biomass is energy that comes from plants or microorganisms that were recently living. Trees, wood, grasses are all examples. The energy comes from burning it. So there are many places in the world that still do not have electricity. And so most of the energy they get for like cooking or for heating their homes is from burning a fire, like burning wood or burning coal. Coal would be a non-renewable resource, but wood is considered a renewable resource because we can regrow trees. They don't grow quickly, but they can regrow in our lifetimes. So the energy comes from burning this material. It can become biofuel when mixed with gasoline. So there are some cars that run on usually they use corn. They use corn to produce this biofuel, which is like a ethanol gasoline. So there's many things that you can burn, but that is biomass. Advantages. Like, let's say you chop down a tree and you have a bunch of wood. It can be stored and used when you need it, right? It can be right outside your house. So it's easily stored. It's easily transported. It's kind of like coal. If it falls out of a truck or a train, it's not that big a deal. It doesn't destroy anything. You can just pick it back up. So it's very easy to transport. It releases less pollution than gasoline. And it sometimes uses materials that might otherwise be thrown away. So there's like some uses where you can take the leftover parts of crops, like all the stalks of a corn plant or all the stalks of a wheat plant, and you could burn those, and those would otherwise just be thrown away or left on the ground. So they're not like materials that we would otherwise use. Disadvantages. Growing crops for biofuels requires land that could be used for growing food. You need to keep replanting these things. Otherwise, it's not really renewable if we're not replanting. And the biggest negative, the biggest disadvantage is that you are still releasing greenhouse gases. So this is basically like kind of like similar to a fossil fuel where we're releasing carbon dioxide into the air when we are burning these things and releasing those gases into the environment. All right, hydroelectric is what it's called when we get energy from flowing water. Hydroelectric power plants are located on dams which control the flow of a river. So they usually this is a river right here. They've built a dam and then they slowly release the water outside of that dam. and that water is turning a turbine, which produces electricity. So the water flows through the turbine and produces electricity. Advantages to this energy: it's clean with no pollution. There's lots of rivers around the world, and so it's pretty reliable energy for lots of people. Engineers can control the flow of water, so they can kind of control how much electricity they're getting. The water is free, and you're not really using any of the water, right? The water is moving over those turbines, turning the turbines, but then the water is continuing to go down the river. So it's not like we're using up the water that is moving through the hydroelectric power plant. Disadvantages. When you build a dam to begin with, it causes a lot of impact to the environment and the habitats for the animals that live around there. It is also dependent on rainfall. So if you're having a big drought for many years, that could potentially you could have run into problems with this kind of energy if you don't have enough water flowing through the rivers. It's expensive to build dams, and also it can hurt fish species that are like moving through this river, and they're moving through these wind turbines, or like I shouldn't say wind turbines, but turbines, moving blades that are creating the electricity. So it can hurt fish species that are moving through those dams. All right, this slide is very similar to one that we had with non-renewable energy because it's kind of the same thing. We're using the same energy to produce, in most cases, electricity. So number one, solar and biomass are used to produce heat. Water is heated, water turns to steam, the steam turns a turbine in geothermal or with these other ones, or water turns to the turbine, and then the turbine is connected to a generator and electricity is produced. Solar is a little bit different because the solar panels don't really have turbines. They're taking the sunlight and making it into electricity. But most of these other things have things that spin, like some sort of turbine, and that produces electricity. Okay, so my question to you is, can you think of why we are not using more renewable energy when we know that it's better for Earth, when we know that fossil fuels are eventually going to run out? Why are we not using more renewable energy? Can you think of some of the disadvantages that we've talked about that make it harder for us to convert more of our energy to renewable energy? And then finally, our meme. I'm a big fan of renewable energy. So I hope you learned a lot about different types of renewable energies. And as always, science rocks.